Hi everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode in this processing programming tutorial series. In this episode, we will be talking about conditionals, if, else, and else if, as well as the comparison operators. Conditionals are used in controlling program flow. They allow you to execute specific lines of code in specific scenarios. If one thing is the case, then something happens. Now, it wasn't a coincidence I used the word if back there. The so-called if statement allows us to let certain lines of code only happen if something is the case. The structure is shown here. You use the keyword if, open parentheses, and if whatever is in between the parentheses is true, the code in between these curly braces is executed. So, if we have this code, had coffee is true, and we have this if statement that checks if the thing that is within parentheses is true, in this case the had coffee variable, which holds true as we see. This means that any code that is in between the curly braces gets executed, and the print line would print output to the console. Now, if had coffee would be false, anything between the curly braces would be skipped. But what if we want to do something with an if statement, but another thing if it is not true, an alternative, a final clause? If something is true, do this, else do this. Now once again I didn't use the word else by accident. This is our second keyword. To any if statement you can chain an else statement. Anything between its curly braces only gets executed if the if clause didn't get executed itself. So, if the condition is true, the first print line gets executed, and if the condition is not true, the second print line gets executed. These two keywords are often enough. Most of the time you'll only have two options to follow, but if there's a third option, or even more, we have one more extra keyword, else if. This is a combination of else and if, and it looks like this. If A is true, execute lines in this code block. Else, if B is true, execute this code block. Else, if C is true, execute this code block, and so on and so on. Else, if none of the above is true, then execute this final clause, this code block. If you paid attention, you will have noticed I said that an if clause gets executed when whatever is in the parentheses is true. I didn't say the variable between the parentheses has to be true. This is because we can also compare values, and with that we get to the final subject of today. We have the following basic comparison operators. A double equal sign, and this checks if something is the same. So 5 equals 5 is true, but 4 equals 3 is false. Not equals, this is an exclamation mark, an equal sign, and this checks if things are not the same. So 5 doesn't equal 5 is false, but 4 doesn't equal 3 is true. The larger than sign, and this checks if value A is bigger than value B. So 5 is bigger than 5 is of course false, but 4 is bigger than 3 is true. The smaller than sign, this checks the opposite of the larger than sign. So 5 is smaller than 5 is still false, but 3 is smaller than 4 is true. There are some more comparison operators, but for now this is enough. We'll talk about the others when we need them. As we have said a lot of things to take in so far, let's try to put them into practice. So for our first example, let's make an int variable, age, that holds a number. Let's put 87 in there. Now, we want to test if I'm old enough to retire yet. So let's make an if statement. First, on a new line, type if, and between parentheses, we test if age is larger than 67. Then, we close the parentheses, open a curly bracket. Now, on a new line, make print line, you could be retiring, exclamation mark. Add a semicolon, and now close the curly bracket. If we run this code, you will see the print line in the output below, since 87 is larger than 67. If we change age to 42 and run the code again, you won't see any output, since the comparison that is made, 42 is larger than 67, evaluates to false, and now the code on the line between the curly brackets does not get executed. Let's make an if-else statement. First, we'll have a boolean had coffee that will set to true, since I did have coffee already. Then we make an if statement, and in between parentheses we once again put had coffee, since we test if had coffee is true. So now we open a curly bracket and make a print line. Maybe have some more, ? And close the curly brace block on the next line. Now we want to include a second option, if we haven't had coffee yet. So on this line, or the next, type else, open a curly brace, and add another print line. You should have some. And close the curly brace. If we run this and had coffee is true, we'll see in the output that we should maybe have some more, since had coffee is true. And the lines between these curly braces get executed. Now if we set had coffee to false and run the code, you'll see you should have some in the console, since now the if is skipped and we reach the else statement. Now for our final assignment, we'll work with a string called name that holds our name. I'll type Santa for now. I want a program to have a fancy greeting for Santa, so I make an if statement. And between the parentheses, test if name is equal to Santa between double quotation marks. Now I open curly brackets, add a print line, Merry Christmas, and close the curly brackets once again. If we run this code, you'll see in the console Merry Christmas. Now, let's say the Easter Bunny needs to have a special greeting too. So we'll test with an else if statement. And between parentheses, we'll test if name is equal to Easter Bunny. Now, an opening curly brace, add another print line, good luck finding eggs, and close the curly brackets. If we run this, nothing has changed since the name is still Santa. But if we change the name, Easter Bunny, you'll see the output is different too. We could add way more else ifs for every festive figure we can think of, but I think that would take too long in this video. Let's add one final else to add something to do when the name isn't either Santa or Easter Bunny. So, else, curly brace, print line, you're boring, and close the curly brace. Now we can play with the name variable above, and if we change it into, for example, John Doe, and when you now run it, it will just say, you're boring. So, to recap, in this episode we learned about conditionals, how we can chain an if statement with multiple else ifs, and finally end on an else to catch all other cases. We also learned about some of the different comparison operators. Next episode, we'll finally get some visual feedback, because then we'll take a look at drawing.